I'm Tandy Culpepper. In this episode of The Hollywood Beat, I talk to a woman whose new memoir, Our Names Do Not Appear, breaks new ground in the genre. Here's my interview with author Judy Lev. Judy, it's so good to finally speak to you.
Yes, I'm delighted to see you. Thanks for calling.
Oh no, my pleasure. First of all, before we get to your memoir, I have to ask you, what's up with the jazz singing?
Well, it was short-lived, I must say. For about a year, I participated in a jazz quartet. I was taking voice lessons, and my voice teacher encouraged me to do this. And there was a lot of pressure to learn how to scat, but
Ella
I just
Fitzgerald.
it wasn't me. I mean, I'm
Yeah,
glad I tried it, but it wasn't me.
I saw Ella Fitzgerald in concert. She's the only person I've ever seen who did scat singing.
Wow. Oh.
So you're not doing the singing anymore.
Well, I'm singing. I've put some Emily Dickinson poems to music, and I'm singing them, and I'm gonna put them up on YouTube eventually.
How much fun is that? She is my favorite American poet, up there with Walt Whitman. Those are
Those are
my,
the two
yeah,
biggies from the
yes,
19th century.
yes, and they're two of my favorites. So you lived in Shaker Heights around Cleveland,
I used to live I grew up in Shaker Heights, which
and
is a suburb of Cleveland.
that's where the first two-thirds of your memoir is set,
Uh,
correct?
No, not real. The second third takes place in Cleveland, in Shaker Heights, all of it. But the first part takes place in Jerusalem, where I lived since 1967.
Oh, okay.
Jerusalem,
So
Israel.
first of all, we need to say again, the title of the book is Our Names Do Not Appear.
This is the book. I
There's
don't
the
know if
book.
it's in focus, but
I'm going to put up a still of the book.
oh, thank you. Okay.
Yes, so we'll be able to see it very clearly. The title is taken from something you uh, reference at the beginning of the
That's
book.
right. It's
Um,
it's the last line of a poem by Adrian Rich called "Diving into the Wreck."
can you read the segment you put in there?
Yes. We are, I am, you are, by cowardice or courage, the one who find our way back to this scene, carrying a knife, a camera, a book of myths in which our names do not appear. It's about a shipwreck. At one level, it's about a shipwreck. But it makes sense on a lot of different levels about our own personal wrecks.
Oh, that's a nice metaphor. I
Mhm.
like that. Uh, you write extensively and poignantly and go into a lot of internal angst about your brother who died as an infant.
Yes. Well, he was almost 2 years old.
How did that affect you initially, and when did it become this gut-wrenching feeling that would not go away?
Yeah, well, the gut-wrenching feeling started in October of 1982 when my own child, my third child, who was a little boy who was 9 months old, was had to be rushed to the hospital because he was having convulsions. And the first chapter is really the beginning of the whole story. And because of the tension of that episode that ignited the memory that I had a baby brother who died. And I was certain that my own son would die, which made me and my mother have something very much in common.
I remember now the opening of the book. I had forgotten that it started in Israel. Yes, that must have been terrifying, because it would be coming full circle. Your baby brother was somehow brain damaged during delivery.
That's right. That's right. He had a brain hemorrhage.
Your mother was profoundly affected by this, was she not?
That's right. She was profoundly depressed, and she needed shock treatments to which helped her enormously get back to life.
And my take from reading this was that because of your mother's depression over the situation with your baby brother, it affected your relationship with her mother, because she wasn't able to mother you in the way that she should have been able.
That's right. That's right. And there was that, and also the fact that there was no mourning allowed. I mean, I was told by a rabbi who came over to the house one afternoon, one Sunday afternoon, and told me and my older sister that our older brother died. And then, but I wasn't allowed to cry. I mean, I burst out crying, and my father, who was the silencer of the family, immediately told me to stop crying. And then it was never mentioned again, having this brother. And a year later, 9 months later, a new brother was born, who, thank goodness, is alive and well to this day.
Yeah, that would have been traumatic, and not being able to express your emotions means that, well, it's sort of like if you fall and hit your head. There's always the concern, you want the lump to come out. You know, I remember my mother always going, let me feel your head, let me feel your head, because otherwise the trauma goes inside. And in this case,
it's
the trauma was internalized, and so you weren't able to express it. Right. Ergo, you're carrying this around.
Right.
Unexpressed.
It went into my lungs and into my gut. So what our consciousness doesn't remember, the body remembers.
That's so right. I had
certain tics, breathing tics, that I didn't know what that was all about. And it was connected to like having to stop trying to control. Yeah.
When did you realize that? When could you put two and two together and realize that you had been profoundly traumatized by this and carried it with you all this time?
That's a really good question, because it took decades, just decades. I mean, I had to be told by other people when I would describe what happened. And I remember sitting with a therapist, maybe even when I was in my 60s, in my late 60s. And I forget the exact words she said, but I said, "Oh, really? I mean, this was," I don't know. It just took decades.
Well,
to understand that this was traumatic. No one had defined it as a trauma.
Yeah, that I don't know where the origin is, but the child is father of the man.
I think Wordsworth.
Wordsworth, thank you.
Yeah.
My heart, that's from My Heart Leaps Up, isn't it?
Or Tintern Abbey. I don't remember which one. I
Yeah,
read it in high
My
school.
Heart Leaps Up When I Behold a Rainbow in the Sky. It's that Wordsworth. Amazing. You are you were you an English major, or how do
Oh,
you?
I studied at the University of Michigan. I studied American Studies, American culture, but I love literature and I wrote poetry and I became a writer.
Renaissance woman.
Yeah.
So getting back to the book, people have called your book a hybrid memoir because you do some things in it that are quite unique. In fact, I'm going to steal from you, but your memoir is told in 3 sections, correct?
That's right.
The second section comes across like fiction. It's third person omniscient, and it's, although it's from your POV, it's really from your father's POV.
That's right. It's close third person point of view, and it's not that it comes across as fiction. It's written as fiction, and I tell the reader at the end of part 1 that I need a story, because in part 1 I collect the facts that I never had really, and the dates and the timing of it all. But I needed a story, so I had to write the story myself. And then the question was, from whose point of view do I write this story? I couldn't write it from a 5-year-old's point of view, and my mother was too depressed. I couldn't write it from her point of view, so I had to take the point of view of my father, who was the chief silencer. And that was very challenging, but very therapeutic, I would say, for me, certainly, because it demanded a certain empathic imagination to enter his mindset.
So many people out there are voracious readers of literature, and I think a good number of them are into fiction, and then there is a subset who are into nonfiction, particularly memoir. They will recognize elements of both in your book.
Absolutely.
It's so, I don't mean to blow smoke up your skirt, but it is so well wrought.
Thank you.
It really is. And I found myself sort of hypnotized by the direction you take in the second section, where you write this as fiction from your father's point of view. And it is so interesting because you are a detective in the first section by what you do, looking for various facts.
Right.
In the second section, you're an internal detective because you're weaving the story from whole cloth. What do you hope that readers take away from your book?
You know, I hope it touches them. I think when I pick up a new book, I read in order to open my emotional life, because it's so easy to get into a sort of a rut or a routine of feeling. And a good book opens you up and realizes there's so much more than what we're, our surface life. not only feeling, but also realizing that nothing is really the way it seems. Because I lived in what looked like the perfect American family, 1955.
Ozzie and Harriet.
Yeah, yeah. And so on the outside, so it was always very confusing because on the outside, everything looked so fine. But it took a long time to realize that it took, things are buried so deep that it takes a long time to understand what's going on. And so that's why it's difficult to write about it, because you don't really know what you're writing about. There's a lot about like writing into a negative space. How do I make this negative space where I didn't know anything into something I can hold on to, so that I could have my own story? Like I had no story. And once I found out all the facts and everything, then I felt like, wow, I have a story too. Like I'm a person. And it wasn't, and the death of this brother was more of a sort of a catalyst of the deeper issue, which was the relationship with my mother, which was very, it was, it's so hard to say it in a word, because then the opposite word is also true. On the one hand, it was distant, but on the other hand, it was very close. At the age of 5, I was the kind of person, and it's not atypical of young children, who absorbed everything, especially from the mother and from the other people in the family too. So I absorbed, just like a sponge absorbs her sadness, but it was an unexpressed. It was not there were no words to this sadness. But I wasn't born sad, so
Right.
I can only imagine that somehow I absorbed the sad vibes in the house, like that the house had absorbed.
So you reach some sort of resolution by having written this book, then?
For sure, yeah, for sure.
Good.
Mainly through the last part, where I kind of rewrote. I mean, now once you can understand what happened, you can rewrite your past also to fit an image that's also emotionally true and that reflects perhaps more of your outlook today. Like it's a process of accepting it all, but transforming it to help you move forward.
I want to move on from the book now to something that you make a small reference to in the book, but is so timely right now. You express something, a disillusionment of the way you felt when you first moved to Israel, and then being there 16 odd years later. And what's going on now in your country has been, well, for us in the United States, I know that President Biden had been concerned about developments there with President Netanyahu and the judicial system. Tell me, how has this all affected you and your thoughts about your country at this point?
Well, it's devastating for me. It's devastating. I came here as a 21-year-old idealistic person who fell in love with the whole idea of Israel, and the idea that Israel is now the stage for the Jewish people. After the Holocaust, there's this great rebirth and and through the years, I mean, it's been a process since the Yom Kippur War in 1973 and the first Lebanon War in 1982. And as the years go by, you learn more and you realize that this is very complicated. It's not just this happy story about the rebirth of the Jewish state, which, is sort of miraculous and wonderful, but the cost and how it, so it's like what's going on in terms of with the Palestinian people. It's as if 1948 is still going on, but now we have this leader who even a former head of military intelligence, I read this afternoon in the paper, says that this person is not fit to be, and he's dangerous to be it's a really dangerous situation. That's how I feel, and how many people like me feel, and many people who understand the situation a lot better than I do and have military experience. And so, I mean, it's an experiment, just like, America is an experiment, but it's how old is it? 200?
250 years, I
250.
guess.
Right. So we're only 75, but you can see how it can just kind of crumble in such a short period of time. It feels like it almost happened overnight, although it's been going on. All these problems that are coming out now, they're not new problems. They've been here all the time, but all of a sudden people are waking up, and there's been such denial here about the occupation. And all of a sudden with this protest movement, people understand, oh yeah, maybe, we talk about democracy up to this particular geographic point, but what we're doing in the West Bank, that's not democracy. So who are we fooling here? What are we talking about? So it's all coming out now. And military people are saying that they don't want to serve, and doctors saying they're not going to serve if there's going to be a dictatorship. And it's a very scary time that arouses lots of strong emotions on both sides. And, extreme religious fanaticism, is that the word?
That will do, yes.
It's who wants to live in a place like Iran? People aren't running to live in Iran, right? Yeah, I mean, especially someone who grew up with the idea of freedom and equality. Well, we certainly, certainly the Israeli Arabs certainly had not been treated equally in Israel right from the beginning. And the Palestinians, in the West Bank, I mean, they're really screwed.
Well, yeah, it's, what we get here in terms of news from Israel is, of course, filtered through the prism of reporters who, you can editorialize in a news story about what it is you choose not to put in. And so we get a certain amount of news here. And I have to tell you, from what I've been able to glean, I'm not a fan of Mr. Netanyahu at all. But we cannot really point too harsh a finger at Israel, because we're going through such a tumultuous time here in the United States.
Yeah.
And have been. And when Donald Trump came to the fore, he gave permission to all of this undercurrent, underbelly of the United States that many of us didn't know existed. And he gave permission for all of these bigots and xenophobia-minded people to say the quiet part out loud. So it's a scary time right
It's
now.
very scary all over the world.
Strong men, are becoming more and more on the world stage, and
Mhm.
right-wing fanaticism is it's scary. I mean, I think of that poem by William Butler Yeats, The Second Coming.
Mhm.
I can't think of but it ends with, what rough beast its hour come at last,
Mhm.
slouches toward Bethlehem to be born.
Right.
So, well, Judy, I've enjoyed this.
Me too. Thank you so much.
No, it's a pleasure.
It's very
The
sweet.
book is Our Names Do Not Appear. You can look for it at your local bookstore, or even better, you can find it on Amazon.
Right.
And that's where I got my copy. I
Mhm.
enjoyed reading it so much. And as I said, Judy, I'm going to steal from you.
Okay. That's what
So
writers do.
that's what writers do.
Yeah.
So have a good rest of your
Thank you so
evening.
much.
And
Thank you so
thank
much.
you.
It was a pleasure speaking with you.
Likewise.